Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Tuesday, August 15th, 2017, and you know what that means. It's time to get nerdy, y'all. Welcome to episode 40 of Two Nerds in a Pod. I'm Lam, also known as Mr. Nice Guy. I got my comrade in gaming commentary, the Miggity Mac, also known as Maction, here with me. Mac, let's jump right into this, man. It's episode number 40, dude.
It is. I can hardly believe we've made it this long and they haven't pulled our license for broadcasting.
I know, man. We're 40% of the way to 100 episodes. How have things been, man? How was your week?
My week was good. Lots of fun stuff. If I may share one particularly amusing anecdote.
Yeah, please do.
So as you know, there's an eclipse coming up this next week on Monday.
Yep.
And there's an event that's being done by a group that I'm affiliated with, an astronomy, education, and outreach group that I'm affiliated with. And during the course of it, we invited the local university to be a part of this particular thing. So it was a little bit interesting to me when I was contacted by the university. And they sent some promotional materials for us to share so that hopefully people we knew would show up to this event. And it listed it as being, it listed like 7-8 different people as being involved in the event. And listed us under sponsors rather than the actual organizers of the event.
The ones who were putting on the whole event. Right.
Yeah. So instead of us being the ones who put it on, and so I responded. I'm like, so I see that we're listed under sponsors. What's with this? We're you guys are along for our ride. They're like, oh, I wasn't aware. I thought we were running the event. It's just like, no, you haven't done. We reserved the venue. Among just all of the things you could imagine. And then what was really hilarious about it is that in their promotional material that they used for it, one of the images, the main image that they used on their poster is guaranteed 100% copyrighted. And I know because I've seen it.
What do you mean by that? I'm confused.
I've
used a copyrighted image.
Exactly. They used copyright image on this marketing information. And so for starters, I'm like, look, you messed this up. Is there any way we can get this? They're like, oh, well, we already sent all this out. Sorry, I didn't know you were doing anything for the event. It's just like, no. You misunderstood. It's you guys who aren't doing anything for the event aside from showing up. And then I was like, hey, we might have a problem sharing this on our website and on our social media because I think I'm pretty sure this is a copyrighted image that's being used here. And the response was, oh, no, I'm sure it's fine. It's just like, okay, well, let me just double check because it's in our bylaws not to open ourselves up to lawsuits. So who exactly was it who put the thing together? And I'll just check with them if they know for sure that they have the rights to it. And the person was like, well, I'm the one who did it. And I'm like, oh, and you don't know for sure that you have the rights to use the image? That means you don't have the rights to use the image. And so I wake up earlier today. I wake up this morning and they've got a completely redone poster, and it's got our logo on it as being one of the organizers, and it has a completely different image, one that isn't copyrighted, one that's public domain. And it was just entirely everything about it was wrong. And I for those of you who are design people, the poster had 3 or 4 different colors. The text had 3 different colors. That the text was in 3 different colors. It used 5 different fonts, all on a sort of 1-page poster thing. So everything about this was just like, oh, where to start with the problems. So that was a little fun thing.
Dude, I hate when people just won't listen and just won't use common sense, man.
Yeah.
That frustrates me, man. I have that experience all the time. I will say, though, I have no interesting stories to share this week. As we talked about off stream, I am beat, and I apologize to our viewers. We're starting about an hour, 20 minutes later than we're supposed to this week. That's on me. I had some responsibilities that I needed to take care of. And in case anyone wants to sponsor us, I'm drinking this delicious drink right now called Pog. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Pog. I was reintroduced to it when I went back to Seattle because my parents are big fans. And it's basically pineapple orange guava juice. And Mac, I don't know if you ever played with Hawaiian milk caps when you were a kid. Did you guys have those Pog toys with the slammers in elementary school?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, so the way that those originated is because there's a drink, and it's really popular in Hawaii. It's called Pog. It's the pineapple orange guava. And when you open up the cap of Pog, there's a Hawaiian milk cap on the top, and you rip that off, and then you can drink the juice. You know, just like how there's a seal on any drink. Someone turned it into a game. That's how Pogs originated. Guys, Pog is delicious. That's the point of my story. To the makers of Pog, if you ever want to sponsor a podcast, this is it. I will drink Pog on every podcast and promote you to our viewership. So I thought I'd throw that out there. Well, thank you everyone who's here for the live show. I have no funny stand-up stories to tell, although I did do 3 shows this past weekend. Worked with some really, really funny comedians and had a blast. Pretty much it. Nothing crazy happened. It was very straightforward. Everyone was hilarious. Everyone was professional. So, Mac, I say we do what we do best, and we hop right into the news, my friend. What do you think?
Absolutely. Mr. Nice Guy, what's been new this week in gaming?
Dude, there's not a lot, man. A lot of stuff happened, but there's not a lot that interested me. So we'll have maybe 3 or 4 news stories, and then we'll just do some other stuff.
Awesome.
Now, the one thing that happened today that was really interesting, and I'm not gonna get an actual story, but I'm just gonna talk about it. Is Sonic Mania came out, and I have not gotten to play it. See, dude, our viewers are so in sync. Like, he literally typed that in the chat right as I was saying Sonic Mania released. We're on the same page, Pazzy160. Mac, have you gotten the chance to play Sonic Mania or watch any of it streamed yet? Any
I've not taken the opportunity.
Okay, do you think it's a game that you're going to pick up, or are you even a Sonic fan? I know you're a retro fan, generally speaking, but are you a Sonic fan?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I enjoyed Sonic's 1 and 2 with a few levels accepted. Sonic 3 I didn't care much for, but yeah, I mean, I'll probably play it at some point in time, but it's not very high on my list at this moment.
It's not like if they released a new Mega Man where you'd be like, "Oh, I got to get this day one."
Well, they did release, just this last week, they released Mega Man Legacy Collection 2.
They did,
and
yeah.
That was Mega Man 7, 8, 9, and 10. I actually watched somebody live stream that. One of our normal viewers, Robo Ridley.
Yeah.
He was streaming that, and he was playing. You know, he speedruns Mega Man 9, and so he was playing the Mega Man 9 version on there. And he was not especially impressed with the fidelity of that game, which is a shame because the fidelity of the first Legacy Collection, which did Mega Man's 1 through 6, was really quite good. So he wasn't very impressed with that fidelity, and I had actually already purchased it, and it was sitting in my Steam library, but I hadn't yet downloaded it. And when I saw some of the frustration he was going through, I'm like, you know what? I've already got Mega Man's 9 and 10 on my Wii console. I'll just stick with that.
I was going to say, to me, that wasn't... I mean, what did they add that made it worth a purchase other than having them in a collection? And really, that's only half of a collection. I have no idea why they did that.
Yeah, basically, I think the big draw was being able to get Mega Man's 9 and 10 on your PC without having to fiddle around with the Dolphin emulator. I think that's kind of the only real advantage to it, because in a lot of the reviews that I've read on Steam about the ports of 7 and 8, there's a lot of issues with them.
Interesting.
So.
Well, yeah, I mean, ports, it seems like they're more and more common. Additionally, we're getting a lot of games that are being revitalized, I guess would be the word. Games like Sonic Mania that are bringing back the Sonic franchise. And I did see on Metacritic that it's the highest rated Sonic game in over 15 years with an 86 overall rating on Metacritic.
Is it not the only Sonic game in 15 years?
No, there's been other Sonic games. There's been like the 3D ones.
Oh, yeah, and there's like Sonic 06, which is considered to be like the devil's spawn.
There's been some Sonic blasphemy in the past few years. Yeah, there really has. So, anyway, congrats to those who made Sonic Mania. Apparently, there's a few like Easter eggs that are throwbacks to some of the tough times that the franchise has had, but I won't spoil those for those of you who may want to find them on your own. Moving on. We got another story, and this is about Call of Duty. I'm not a big Call of Duty fan anymore, but I do feel like this year's Call of Duty has the potential to change that. So I want to briefly talk about this story. This is on GameSpot.com. It says you can see a preview. Whoops. How about I don't start in the middle of the story, Mac? How about I start with the beginning?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
That would make way more sense. It says Call of Duty World War II's multiplayer beta launches later this month, and we now have a better idea of what to expect from it. The beta will feature the Pointe du Hoc, Adrenas, and Gibraltar maps. Developer Sledgehammer notes that there will be, quote, at least 3 multiplayer maps included, suggesting more could be added before the beta wraps up. Team Deathmatch, Domination, and Hardpoint will all be playable, as will War, the new mode that will help make World War II feel fresh. Specifically, you might be able to check out Operation Breakout, described as, quote, the first war mode experience. Beta testers will also have the opportunity to experience Divisions, which serve as the replacement for the Pick-10 customization system that Call of Duty games have been using for years. All right, so bottom line, guys, you can play that Call of Duty beta. It's going to be first on PlayStation, August 25th through 28th, and then I believe September 1st through 4th, it will be back in another beta that's open to everyone on both PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Now, Mac, as a fan of playable demos, because every time we talk about a game that you're thinking about crowdfunding, you say that that's your one rule. And I wanted to ask, do you feel like betas are kind of spoiling? I know you don't play console, but I mean, let's use the example of Chasm, you know? Do you feel like these betas or even these demos that come out so far in advance of a game releasing are spoiling the game, you know, stealing the game's thunder for when it finally does release? Take your time. Think about it. Get your wagers in.
You know, honestly, I'm not sure. I go back and forth on that question, on the answer to that question, because sometimes I feel like, in the case of, for example, Chasm, which I've had alpha and beta access to for years.
Exactly.
Yeah. That there is some amount of novelty that the finished product won't have because I've had so much time with it.
Yes.
But I don't think it will decrease how much I've enjoyed it. It will just have extended how long I've enjoyed it for. So, will it be novel so much? No, but I'll be pretty dang good at the controls when it's finally fully released.
Now, someone in the chat, Pazzi, actually says, I have absolutely gotten my fill of certain games for free over a beta weekend. And that's kind of how I feel about it. And, you know, now that we're live and I'm on the spot, I'm going to forget the names of these games that I wanted to mention. But what's the game that we went and we met the community manager?
H1Z1.
Yeah, H1Z1 is a prime example of a game that has basically been in beta forever. And, I mean, basically they're saying, hey, we're working on the game. Here's a partially finished version of it. Why don't you play it? Tell us what you think. In the meantime, we'll keep working on it. And then when it's done, then it'll be quote unquote released for real. And I don't know. I mean, with a game like that, there's not really a single player story to spoil. With a game like Chasm, is that procedurally generated or is it?
It is procedurally generated.
Okay. So with that game too, I mean, there's a certain level of replay value that you can get. And I wouldn't say that the game is spoiled, but I do think, like Pazzi's saying in the chat, that you can get your fill of it. And like you said, it loses the novelty once it finally releases. And especially with a crowd-funded game, I personally would be frustrated if they released the alpha and then released beta, and then finally, once the game is done, then they say, hey, thanks for supporting us. I know you played through the game while it was in its crappiest stage, but thanks for playing through it so much that you're now bored of it, and now we can give you the actual finished product. To me, that just doesn't make sense. And maybe I'm being cynical, but I feel like maybe we should cut back on the betas and just release the game when it comes out. And if you're really that talented of a developer then the game will sell and it'll do well and people will like it. I don't see any reason why a franchise that's as established as Call of Duty needs for there to be a multiplayer beta. They know how much stress is going to be on the servers when it comes out. They've been doing this for over a decade. I just don't understand the need for a playable beta. And I would love to hear a counter argument from you, Mac, or from anyone in the chat who disagrees.
I think something that from my perspective is important is the reason why when we talk about crowdfunded games, when we talk about anything from smaller studios, I really want to see playable demos, particularly because that shows to me as a potential buyer, as a potential crowdfunder, that you've got your stuff together, that you are aware of the moving parts of game making, how they fit together, and can produce a product. Maybe under ideal circumstances, you can produce a product that is pleasing. With a lot of larger studios, with a lot of studios that have other games under their belts, it's not quite as important to me for having access to the beta because, well, they're still alive. They've been doing it for X number of years. They know how to throw together a game. So I feel like betas, for the purposes of convincing us that the game is worth our money, is nowhere near as necessary as it is for smaller game companies.
And I think, just to be clear, I think that they're doing it to build hype. I think they're saying, hey, we got a new Call of Duty game coming out. Last year was kind of a down year where it didn't do nearly. See, wow, Pazzy's on point. I literally just said that they're doing this to build hype. And in the chat, he says they're doing it to get people excited. Wow, we're on. Dude, Pazzi, you should be a guest on here sometime, man. You're on point with us. And we like to talk to people who disagree with us as well. But anyway, I think that, like he said and like I was saying, they're not doing it to test the servers. They're really doing it to build hype. But build it in a different way. You're a billion-dollar company, biggest franchise in all of gaming. There's no reason why they need a beta. And someone said the next point that I was going to talk about too, Polywalk, who I think it's your first time in here. Welcome to the stream. Welcome to Two Nerds in a Pod, episode 40. He says, I think they use betas in COD as a way of balancing the new features and weapons for the multiplayer. And that's true, but I think, and I really was going to get into this, I really think that they are going to be balancing the game for the whole year that it's the relevant Call of Duty. Because there will be constant nerfs, there will be constant updates, nerfing guns, making guns more powerful, increasing and decreasing the speed at which they shoot. That's not going to be something that comes out in a day one patch and then is left alone for the rest of the year. That's going to be something that is constant. And so I don't think that the beta will solve that problem. It'll be solved as esports become more not more relevant, but as the esports scene starts for this year's WW2, Call of Duty, and whatnot. So anyway, we've talked about this. We beat this horse to death. We got a couple more news stories, and then we'll move on to our next segment. Let's see. We got, man, there's really not a lot that I want to talk about. Mac, if I was to do like one more news story, you think we'd be good? Would you be cool with that?
Well, yes, but if I may make a slight departure and engage on something about esports.
Yeah.
Ever since we did our last Two Nerds in a Pod, we had talked a little bit about esports and its ever evolving and ever more legitimate, possibly, status, especially what with the International Committee on Olympics or International Olympic Committee. That's the one, IOC, discussing esports. And here's something that's kind of stuck with me. It was became a topic of conversation as I was chatting about some of the show's news bits with some friends. But one of the things that is somewhat notable is that esports is a sort of forever evolving situation. Going back to what you're talking about constant balancing, constant changes. I wonder if esports is not doomed to failure in the notion of being enshrined as an Olympic sport precisely because of that. Because while there may be some small and very small evolution in Olympic sports, that primarily comes in the form of Olympic gear, are speed skaters going to be permitted to wear full body, lycra to move faster? Is it going to be permitted this or that? But questions that are very much under the IOC's control. Whereas something like esports, not only are they beholden to a specific game maker, but also maybe potentially a specific version of the game that they have to maintain a game at for competitive play. And then at that point, once we take a game and we separate it from the normal evolution of the rest of the game, are we not just having a sort of small splinter group of people who are only practicing version 1.7.3 of Super Smash Brothers? Is that not only what's going to be practiced just by the people who are going out for Olympics? And then, of course, the only reasonable solution seems to be for the IOC to make their own esports game. And then, you wind up having a esports that really isn't all that esporty because it's just made by the IOC. Just interesting thoughts I've been thinking about since our conversation.
It'll be interesting to see, and that's a really good point. Now, as a small counter, there are some games that have esports scenes that don't evolve that much.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as games like Counter-Strike, for example, same maps, same guns. People have been playing the game for over a decade, and I mean, it hasn't had a lot of updates in the way of making the game different. It's more like, hey, let's try this map as a team. Let's work on it. Let's come up with our strategy. You're right, though. With annual releases, your Call of Duties, or even a game like League of Legends where they're constantly releasing new heroes, or a game like Hearthstone where new cards are coming out, you're right. It's hard for there to be consistency. But I feel like for some games it could work. And so we'll have to see what happens. But I think that's a great point of conversation. With running in the Olympics, for example, you know how far you're running. No one's ever going to say, hey, this year we're going to have you walk on your hands, so you don't have to deal with that. So it'll be interesting to see what the IOC comes up with. Now, we have a few more stories, but, Mac, they're honestly none of them are really fascinating to me. I'm going to let you pick the last news story, and then we'll move on.
I love it when I get to pick.
So we got Star Wars Battlefront 2. We got Destiny 2. Or we have Telltale Games.
Well, I'm going to use the Force here and go for the Star Wars Battlefront 2 story.
Awesome, and this is a good story that actually I think will interest our viewers. This is on Game Rant. It says, after its debut at E3 2017, Star Wars Battlefront 2 is vying to be the definitive experience that fans expected to see with its predecessor. EA is pulling out all the stops this time around, finally adding to the highly requested single-player story campaign centered around an Imperial Spec Op unit known as Inferno Squad. Along with a story campaign, a deeper and more customizable multiplayer experience may make Star Wars Battlefront 2 EA's most ambitious title to date. I'm not even going to read the whole article, but there's a few things here that we can discuss, and the main one is ambition in games. I'm going to go ahead and state my opinion on this whole concept, and then Mac, if you have something you want to say, you can get in, or if we want to be done, we can do that. So here's my thing. I don't need a game to be ambitious. I need a game to be polished. I need it to have replay, and I just need it to be well made. I just want a good polished experience, whether that's single player or multiplayer or a combination of both. I don't need a ton of ambition. No Man's Sky was ambitious. Destiny claimed it was going to be ambitious and ended up not being ambitious. In fact, if you guys in the chat want to let us know other games that were supposed to be ambitious that ended up not working, I would love to see those in the chat. I feel like more often than not, when a developer tries to do something ambitious, it ends up being a disappointment because they always overpromise and underdeliver. Now, of course, for games to evolve, people have to try new things. But EA has made a ton of really, really ambitious games that have been successful. Think of Battlefield. Those are very ambitious games. Destructible environments. Large scale maps with dozens of players. So I don't know. I don't need Star Wars Battlefront 2 to be an ambitious game. I just need it to be a well-polished game with a lot of replayability. That's my opinion on the whole issue of ambitious games. Mac, you got anything, or should we move on?
I think we can move on. A couple of people in the chat have mentioned other ambitious game, Goddess, which was supposed to be this thing where you could, by the makers of Beyond Good and Evil, who could do large things, you could destroy things, you could really just basically be the god of this digital world, and it really did not deliver on its promises. But yeah, I think a lot of us, we all feel the pain of those times when we were looking forward to a title for what it promised, but it just didn't deliver. I feel in a lot of ways like Fable wound up going that route. Fable was a good game, but it made big promises and didn't quite deliver, especially on the I felt like it really didn't deliver on the way that it that the marketing presented it as being able to be full of moral decisions. It mostly just wound up being did you kick children and dogs or did you not type of a thing. That was kind of how the morality decisions in that game went, which was disappointing. Yeah. But that's all I've got to say on that.
All right. Well, guys, that has been our news for the week. Mac, I'll let you take it away with our next segment.
All right, so this next segment is a little something we like to call gaming history. We've taken a look at the gaming world around us, and now we'll look into the past. Now, in this past week, that is, August 15th, or from August 8th to August 15th in years past, we have been treated to some absolutely fantastic, amazing, just gaming developments. In stark contrast to some weeks where we're kind of digging a little bit deep, this time, we don't have the time to go through all of these. And now that I've spent a full 45 seconds of our time talking about how we don't have the time, I will now actually talk about them. The Sega Genesis, released in 1989, and the Super Nintendo, released in 1991. Now, for whatever reason, maybe because I wasn't paying much attention at the time, I didn't think that the Sega Genesis had that much of a lead on the Super Nintendo. In my mind, they were always neck and neck, competing, release date right at the same time. In my mind, I remember Genesis does what Nintendo don't. I remember those kinds of advertisements, those things going on, and it seemed very much like they were neck and neck, that they seemed to have been released even on the same day, in my mind, from the way that the marketing material was. But in fact, not. The Sega Genesis had a 2-year lead on the Super Nintendo. Now, of course, we all know that when we're talking about Sega or the Genesis and the Super Nintendo in the same breath, we have to mention about this console war here that it was the Super Nintendo that prevailed. After all, the Super Nintendo did sell 41.9 million units in its lifespan, whereas the Genesis weighed in at 29 million units. So it certainly did win, but even with a 2-year thing, which, let's be fair, remember that the Sega Master System was released as a direct competitor to the Nintendo Entertainment System, and it did nowhere near as well. So even though Sega did lose, this really was kind of a big step forward for Sega. We can't say that about all of their consoles, but certainly about this one, it was a good thing and a very successful advertising campaigns that they did. But we had the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis launch titles for both. We had Altered Beast for the Sega Genesis. I believe we also had the first Vector Man for the Sega Genesis.
That was a fantastic game.
Oh, really was. And for, of course, the Super Nintendo, we had not only Super Mario World, as well as F-Zero. Two frightfully good games in their own right. But yeah, that's just a little bit of the gaming news. And if you can believe it, it was middle of August in 1998 and 1991. We saw the birth of. I really feel like Genesis versus Super Nintendo was the birth of console wars as we know it. Now, granted, consoles were only born a generation before, but that really kind of set the tone. Genesis does what Nintendo, and I don't think we've ever reached in advertising quite the same fever pitch between consoles as we did then. I mean, Mr. Nice Guy, can you think of any console commercials that have really tried harping that hard as Genesis does what Nintendo don't?
Yeah, I actually can. There was one recently, and it was not a commercial, but it was actually maybe it was. It was I saw it on YouTube, and it was talking about how you share games on your PlayStation 4. Because at the time, Microsoft was thinking about with the Xbox One making it so you couldn't share your discs. So in other words, they were going to set it up so that once you put a disc into your Xbox, that game was tied to your Xbox. And you could not let your friends borrow it because it would not work on a different console. And so Sony came back at him with this commercial that said, here's how you share a game on your PlayStation 4. And it just had one guy holding a game and he just handed it to the other guy, and then they just like nodded at each other. It was very, very funny. I can't do it justice just by explaining it. But it actually resulted in Microsoft going back and changing that that policy where they were going to make it impossible to share games between consoles. So that's the only thing I can think of that really is even close. But yeah.
Yeah, very fair, very fair. But yeah, because I know that one too. And I have seen that, but I still don't think that hits the same levels, but that's just me. Either way, that's been a little bit of gaming history for you. Sometimes the past really does inform the future, and sometimes it's just kind of fun to think about and look back at some of the crazy stuff that's gone on in the past.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, should we move on to our next segment?
Absolutely.
Sweet. So our next segment is the viewer question of the week. A segment where you guys ask us a question and we answer it, and we do it every week. This week's question comes from Galvatron, who is not here in the chat for the first time. I'm going to call 911 because I think there might be a problem. He's always here every week, so I'm wondering if he's okay. But no, in all seriousness, he says for tonight, microtransactions in single-player games. Yay or nay? Shadow of War. Now, to add some background to this, I don't know what Shadow of War is, but typically Mac and I have discussed microtransactions in multiplayer games and the premise of pay to win. So this is kind of a different spin on the question that he's bringing us. He wants to know our thoughts on microtransactions in single-player games. Mac, do you want to field this one first?
No, I'd like you to field it.
Okay, sounds good. And it's a tough one because I can't think of a game that I've really been into other than, actually, no, it's not a single-player game. I almost said Hearthstone, but that's definitely a multiplayer game. Man. I'm going to say that I'm against them just because I feel like if it's a single-player game that requires multi-transaction or microtransactions, then it's the type of game that requires you to really grind. And if it's that type of game, then they should make it a fun enough grind that you don't want to spend money to bypass that grinding, right? Because if it's just a 15 or 20 hour or even like up to a 40-hour experience, just play the game. You know what I mean? But if this is a single-player game that you can put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours into, then you shouldn't want to pay to bypass the grind. The grind should be fun enough to make you want to get the additional, swords or armor or currency rather than paying for it. So I'm against it. I hope I said that in a way that people understood. Mac, what do you think?
The only time I've really been a fan, because I mean, coming from mobile games and a lot of mobile game reviews that I've done in the past, I've always been a big, big opponent of microtransactions. I don't like them, and very often I would completely avoid any game that had them. The only type of transaction that I really would go for would be the types that would allow you to maybe not necessarily avoid the grind, but decrease the grind by like doubling whatever your widgets were. So anything that I have to continually purchase in a game, whether mobile, whether console, whether PC, I am against just on principle. I figure I just want to pay for the game, play the game, and enjoy the game. I don't want to be a whale. That's the term for the people who wind up buying lots and lots of microtransactions. If you read any or watch any of the things that people who make games with that are pay to play that they do with that sort of thing, they do call those particular customers whales. So yeah.
Someone in the chat just brought up the example of Dead Space 3, which I skipped. I only played the first Dead Space game. And they say, I remember Dead Space 3's single-player campaign had microtransaction to, quote, help you build weapons faster. That's what Anxiety said in the chat. And then someone else agreed with him, Kane, and said Dead Space 3 is what started my EA boycott. Dead Space 3, now, in playing the first game, I thought that those games were around like a 30 to 40 hour experience, maybe even less if you're running through it quickly. So once again, I just don't get the point of building anything faster in a game that short. I mean, you pay $60 for a game. Why would you pay more to make a short game shorter? That just doesn't make sense to me. And short is all relative. Like a 40-hour game is a long experience, but it's not like a Skyrim where, you might get frustrated after a while and say, geez, I just need to get this sword. Or I just need to get healed of this curse, and I'm going to pay money to do it. I just don't understand the premise of paying microtransactional money in a single-player game that's so short. But that's just me. And Mac, did you have anything else to say on this topic? Or
No, not really. I think that's all I've got for it.
That has been our viewer question of the week. Submit those questions before the show to us at Two Nerds in a Pod on Twitter or to our Gmail account, twonerdsinapodcast@gmail.com. Mac, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, so the next segment we have is a little thing we like to call Kick or Kickstart, and this involves a little bit of involvement from those of you who are here. What I'll do is I'll put a link in the chat for those of you who are here for the live showing. You can check that out, and I'll talk a little bit about it. Mr. Nice Guy and I will banter back and forth about the virtues and the vices of such a project, and then at the end, we will give our determination whether we think this should be kickstarted, it's worthy of our money, or it should be kicked out of here, kicked to the curb, kicked wherever, but not into our hearts and our wallets. So here it comes. It is called the Next Gen Nintendo 64 controller.
Oh, I saw this.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I saw this just after, I think it was the next day after we did our last Two Nerds in a Pod episode. And I was like, oh, I can't wait. This is going to be awesome. But I knew it was already going to blow past its funding goal by the time we, talked about it tonight, which it has. They were looking for $13,000 to make a run. They are at 10 times that amount with 113,000. So not quite 10 times, but they're getting pretty close. So the idea is it's a remake of the Nintendo 64 controller that gets rid of the three-prong design and instead puts it into a form factor that's a bit more familiar and for a lot of us a bit more enjoyable to use. Double Z buttons on the back and with a spot to plug in your Rumble Pack or your memory card in there. So I have to admit, as I've recently gotten my Nintendo 64 and my EverDrive for my 64, I've been on the lookout for some good Nintendo 64 controllers that are nice and pleasant. And I do just want to point out, if you have the opportunity, Google Hori N64 controller, because this controller is considered to be basically the best of the Nintendo 64 controllers. It's very rare. You can buy them for, maybe $60-$80 on eBay, used. But they are excellent controllers. They are considered to be the best of the best. And you'll notice that the layout is not identical, but
not at all,
pretty close. But pretty close in that they've got the analog stick to the far left, the C buttons to the far right, and then you move in toward the middle and you've got buttons and the D-pad. But you're getting much closer to that in this form factor than you are with others. So for those of us who've been eyeing a replacement Nintendo 64 controller and kind of want that Hori pad, but can't justify shelling out the $80 for one, hey, $20. That'll do the trick. So I think I've already shown my bias here, and that I'm going to be definitely, for my part, going for the kickstart on this one. But this isn't the first controller that they've done. They sell one currently through various very reputable sellers like ThinkGeek, Amazon, and such, of a Nintendo, an NES controller that's, that I'm not exactly sold on. It has a very similar form factor, but it has extra joysticks and buttons, which I'm just not really a big fan of in that Nintendo controller. But apparently they've got, enough reputation, and they've done a good enough job that they can sell it through very reputable sellers, that NES controller. So it's not the first time that they've made their own controller, which gives me great hope for this actually going through. And their NES controller had both functionality to plug into your NES console as well as to plug USB. Same controller, just kind of had a pigtail and had one NES and one USB port. Now this one does not have the same, but then again, I'm going to be playing it on my console anyway, so I'm not too concerned about having USB functionality. But that is something that they specifically address in not having a USB for their for this first run of controllers. But there we go. So there's what we're looking at. I certainly think it's worth kickstarting. But I turn it to you, Mr. Nice Guy. What do you think?
Here's the thing that confuses me. This actually, the layout of the controller is different than the N64. Because so the analog stick was actually in the middle of the controller on the N64, and then I believe the trigger was on. Yep, you have one right there. So the trigger is just in the middle on the back, which it gave you a feeling like you were shooting a gun. When you were playing games like GoldenEye. And to me, that was part of what made the N64 controller one of the best designed controllers of all time. This is much more like a Pro controller or even like a GameCube controller than it is like an N64 controller. They've added additional buttons, and the layout is not even close to being true to N64. So I guess I just don't understand why they're even attributing this to why they're even making a comparison to the N64 controller, because this is so vastly different. Now, just so I'm clear, Mac, this connects directly to the N64, right?
Yes.
And cannot connect to anything else without an adapter.
Correct.
Okay. So, I still have an N64. It's been years since the last time I had any desire to fire up my N64.
And maybe that's because of the very lackluster controller for the Nintendo 64, Mr. Nice Guy. Have you thought about that?
No, I haven't. Because as I just said, the N64 controller in my mind is one of the best designed controllers of all time.
Rose-colored glasses, you go back and you will find that it is horrible. Horrible.
What's horrible about it?
It's everything. Look, there's holding it in three different ways.
Well, that's versatility. That's versatility.
Versatility, yes. That's what you want in a controller. Versatility. Bah, humbug. Mr. Nice Guy, I'm going to get my hands on one of these, and the next time you come to visit, we'll give it a shot, and I will give you the opportunity to try it out and make the deliberation then. Now, I am a very big fan of this, and in my own way, I have emulated games on my computer from the Nintendo 64 and used a controller like this, like a conventional controller that we're used to from the past 20 years, or sorry, 10 years of video gaming. And I definitely feel like it's much more in keeping with what the kind of controller experience I want now, as opposed to what I wanted then when I didn't know any better and there was an analog stick, and that was cool because it was cool to have something different than a D-pad.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm going to say kick, and mostly because I'm not firing up my N64 nearly enough to justify this.
Okay.
And additionally, because if I did want to fire up my N64, I could easily go find some N64 controllers for less than $20. Now, that said, the one thing I hated about the N64 controller was the lack of durability, particularly with the analog stick. If you ever pick up an N64 controller that's been used very roughly or just very frequently, you'll notice the analog stick is loose, right? And it's lost some of its sensitivity. So to me, that was always a frustration, and that's one thing about this new one that could be a benefit, is not having to deal with that. So my vote is kick, but that's just me.
Yeah, and I say kickstart. And to your point about the joystick, I certainly replaced my analog stick with a GameCube-style one on that blue Nintendo 64 controller that I was holding up a bit ago. Because, yeah, the old ones, just even in good condition, were still not as good as they ought to be to play through the games now. But yeah, so I say kickstart. Mr. Nice Guy says kick. Give us your deliberations in the chat. Kick or kickstart. And while you guys are getting caught up, we'll go ahead and move on to the next little segment, which, Mr. Nice Guy, I think it's your favorite, isn't it?
It is, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. It's time for the main event. It's time for the Dummy of the Week. A segment of the show where we talk about someone who did something stupid, idiotic, or downright dumb, and I make fun of them. This week's story comes from Kotaku.com. And it says, actually, just to be clear, comes from Kotaku.com AU. It says 6 people from Santa Clara, California have been arrested and charged with selling arcade cabinets full of, quote, counterfeit games, which they are alleged to have been profiting off to live like rock stars. As the San Francisco Chronicle reports, a woman, her son, ex-husband, and 3 others were arrested on Thursday, accused of forging and selling arcade cabinets that, quote, played classics such as Galaga, Tank Battalion, and 5 different versions of Pac-Man. So, just so you guys know, if you're ever going to make an arcade and sell illegal games on it, don't include 5 versions of Pac-Man. No more than 3. This is a rule of thumb. I thought this was common knowledge. If you have too many versions of Pac-Man, you're bound to go down. Additionally, why is this lady going into business with her ex-husband? Doesn't make any sense to me.
Maybe they parted on good terms, Mr. Nice Guy. Not everybody hates each other when they get out of a relationship.
No,
I think I'm friends with like 5 of my ex-girlfriends.
I'm telling your wife, bro.
She knows. We were there together. She laughed.
Okay, fair enough. I'm just saying, I'd imagine that dividing up the funds would get tricky if you went into business with your ex. That's all I'm saying. I'd imagine that. Okay, so anyway, the story goes on to say those games are all from Namco Bandai, who, as the Mercury News points out, also have their American offices in Santa Clara. So tip number 2, if you're going to use a company's games illegally, don't start your business in the same city as the company that you're stealing from. That just makes it so much easier for them to find out. That'd be like, Mac, if I stole your TV and then moved in next door to you and watched your TV with the blinds open all the time as you're walking past. That's what that's like, right? I think that's idiotic. That's just me. It goes on to say the 6 accused had been operating a company called Coin Op Store, selling cabinets containing between 60 and 3,000 counterfeit games preloaded onto them. Prosecutors say the six had been charged with a total of 14 counts of felony counterfeiting. They're also saying that in addition to possible fines and prison time, there's a maximum sentence of 11 years, the money the accused made from selling the machines and the stuff they bought with it might be seized as well. Now, here's where it gets crazy. That list includes stuff like $1.2 million in cash, a 2012 Mercedes-Benz, a 2015 BMW, and 5 properties. So, additionally, if you're going to run a business like this, don't live so frivolously. That just draws attention to you. I bet Namco Bandai was mad, and they were happy to eat them up just like Pac-Man and take all that money once they discovered all this theft that was going on. Guys, that has been our dummy of the week. Mac, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. So this last little bit is a fun thing we call legalese, where we talk a little bit about some of the lawsuits, some of the law passings, some of the everything that goes on legally adjacent that could impact or does impact us and our and the way that we consume video games. Well, this one is a little bit interesting. So as we know, Disney has won our hearts with their very good treatment of the Star Wars franchise. However, there is a darker side to Disney, or at least if you believe a certain San Francisco mom who filed a class action lawsuit accusing Disney and 3 of their software developers of violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act.
What?
The claim is that Disney has been collecting personal information on kids under 13 and selling the data to advertisers, something that is expressly forbidden by the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. So this is very much a suit in development.
What's the name of the act again?
Gosh, why did you have to ask me that?
Because it's a tongue twister and I'm trolling. I apologize.
It is. Thank you for trolling me, Mr. Nice Guy. But no, so this is a serious allegation. So basically, there are laws in place in the United States to try and protect children from basically online predators. And not just the type that we're primarily worried about with the very unsavvy stuff, but also being unfairly and terribly targeted by advertisement and things like that. So this is a very serious allegation because it could have really, really, really harsh ramifications on Disney and their software developers if it can be shown in court that this is serious, that this is actually going on. Now, here's where it's going to get interesting, because if and I mean, we all have apps on our smartphones that gather some information about us, whether we're talking location data, right, that your Maps program is gathering on you. Or if you're playing Pokemon Go, you are absolutely getting that, and your camera, and anytime you're curious about what kinds of data is being gathered up by any of the various applications that you may have on your phone. And I can't speak to iOS users, but at least for Android users, you can go to the applications individually and look up their permissions, which will specifically tell you what things they have access to. Sometimes it'll be things like your identity, which means your email address, possibly your phone number, things like that. Others might have access to the ability to take or store photos on your phone itself. Now, in some cases, that may or may not be more than just, it has images that it stores on your phone that it calls up from time to time. And not so much maybe trolling through your camera or your gallery, but that is always a possibility anyway, point being is that these protections are there to protect children. Gosh, well, I am struggling this evening, Mr. Nice Guy. This is what we get for starting late.
We're both tired. It's my fault, dude.
But it is one of those things where if the returns, so if it turns out that data is being gathered on children by Disney and being sold to advertisers, the best defense that they could mount after that would be, well, it was incidental, which would probably fly if we were talking about adults. Incidental data gathering, well, we didn't really mean to gather it. It was just something that kind of happened, has flown in the past when we are talking about the information about adults. But because there's such a higher standard being put for the protection of children, if it is found out that there was data being sold and it was from these children's applications, it was incidental, we weren't purposefully gathering it, we weren't targeting this data specifically to gather from children, will not fly in a court, and they will get hit hard. Yeah, so it's interesting. We'll keep our eyes on it as it develops, but that's just something that I don't know, could spell some big trouble for Disney.
That's right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that's pretty much our show. Two Nerds in a Pod, episode number 40. Thank you for tuning in. I don't know why I paused right before I said that. Guys, we like to do one last thing before we end the show. It's our final segment where you get to interact with us, where we talk about what we've been watching and what we've been playing. That's the name of the segment. While we're talking about our nerdy media and games we've been into, we want to hear from you in the chat because we're always looking for new cool stuff to check out. So let us know here live what you're playing, what you're watching. If you're listening after the fact, just shout it out loud on the bus, in your car, on a private jet, wherever you're at. Just shout it out. Mac,
now, Mr. Nice Guy, can I go first?
I was going to say, Mac, do you want to get us started off? Go for it.
I do, because I want you to be proud of me. I'm watching Madam Secretary.
That's what I'm talking about. What do you think?
I really enjoy it so far. Téa Leoni is fantastic, as she is in everything. I like several of the other actors and actresses in the series.
Here's the $1 million question. Mm-hmm. Are you watching it with the missus?
The missus is nearby. She is adjacent as I watch it. However, right now, the missus has a lot on her plate, so she doesn't have much time to slow down and actually watch television.
Okay,
so she's usually doing other things while it's going on. So I am wife adjacent when watching.
The reason I ask is because,
it would be disingenuous to say that we were watching it together.
Fair enough. The reason I ask is because, as you know, I know your wife very well. I had several classes with her in college. I consider both of you to be dear friends, and I know that she likes debate. I know that she loves the art of debate, and so there's points in the show where there's debates between, husband and wife about politics, about policy, and things like that. And so I thought that she would probably get a kick out of that because I know that she really does like to debate. And so I don't know, maybe once she has more free time, she can get more into it and see some of those political issues come up. But I'm glad you're watching it, and I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Mm-hmm. It is very good. And that's pretty much it. I'm really excited for Defenders. That's coming out in a couple of days. I am going to binge the crap out of that.
Nice. And then what about, have you been playing anything? Or do you want me to hop in and say what I've been watching?
Well, what I've been playing a little bit of Sundered, and that's been enjoyable. Also, using a mod on Steam called Synergy, I've been playing Half-Life 2 with a friend. So we've been playing Half-Life 2 cooperatively, and it's been quite a bit of fun.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Like, that sounds like it would be a lot of fun.
Oh, it really is. And thankfully, he's local, so we do it essentially couch co-op style.
Dude, that's cool, man. I'm jealous.
He can't feel the void in my heart left by our last couch co-op session.
Dude,
but
it was fun. It was fun.
But it's good nonetheless.
Good. Very good. Well, cool. Now, as far as what I've been watching, Wifey and I got into season 5 of Arrow. And it scratches. I was telling someone else this the other day. I like Flash and I like Arrow. They scratch different itches for me. Like, Flash has a little bit more comic relief. Arrow has a lot more hand-to-hand combat. And so that's what I'm really getting into right now. It's just the fights, the action in Arrow. It's a less funny show. But it just has really, really good action sequences, and the story is good too. So that's what I've been watching, and as far as what I have been playing, still just on that retro kick, man. Still been playing different stuff on the Retro Pi. Just downloaded Bucky O'Hare. When I went to that arcade in Seattle, I got a bunch of ideas for games to put on the Retro Pi. So I did that. I've been doing a lot of Galaxian and some Space Invaders, getting into that old school stuff. And then, as far as upcoming games, we got Uncharted coming, we got Destiny coming, all within the next 3 weeks. So there's no shortage of things to play that are coming up. Well, Mac, do you want to read what our people have been playing in the chat, what the viewers have been into?
Absolutely. So on the watching front, we have Star Trek Enterprise Season 2, Scrapped Princess, Knights and Magic, and Area, Game of Thrones, and Veep. As for games, we have... and I missed Pokemon movies. That's good stuff, too. I want to be the very best. As for playing, we see some Stardew Valley, some Observer, Nidhogg 2, and West of Loathing. Most of those I've never heard of, so thank you guys. They are on our list to take a look at once we're done with our backlogs.
I don't know what Nidhogg 2 is. That sounds...
I think it's a combat game. I think it's primarily based around combat, or maybe I'm thinking of something else. But it does sound like an interesting name, doesn't it?
It really does.
And clearly it's the sequel to a previous one, so the first one must have been good enough.
Dude, it'd be cool if someone once made a game named Number 2 and there was no previous version. Dude, I want to be the first person to do it.
I think you should. I think you must. I think you owe it to the world, Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah, just trolling in game titles. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that has been episode number 40 of Two Nerds in a Pod. We're on our way to episode 100. We're 40% of the way there. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you had fun tonight, please hit us up on iTunes. Leave a rating, like, subscribe. Mac, you got anything else you want to say to the people?
You guys are the greatest viewers on Twitch. We appreciate you joining us and making this show what it is.
We'll see you next week. Same bat place, same bat time, same bat rhymes. Keep it nerdy. Deuces.